Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's a little chilly today, and it's in the 30s, and we may even get snow/ice on Saturday. So that's delectable. Holly's doing better. I'm Irish superstitious, so I don't want to knock on wood that this continues, but it looks good. I so far don't have COVID myself. Our schedule seems to be coming back to normal. That is to say, the terrible things that were put on hold or that we didn't pay as much attention to over the holidays are back with us again. And among the principal things that we're dealing with are, what are the courts going to do? And the circuit court in D.C. is going to have an argument on the 9th, so that's coming up. And they're going to be considering whether or not Trump has immunity. And there are a couple of ways they can handle it, including the fact they might say it's not ripe yet. But they might also say, go right to the heart of the matter and say, you don't have immunity for that. You don't have immunity to commit crimes while president. And in fact, if there's a rule that makes any sense, it's the opposite. So Trump, I think, loses that one. I think even the Supreme Court would have trouble granting any kind of immunity from prosecution. But then the other question is more difficult, only because there are so many cowards in the mix. And the other one is, can we bar Trump from office because he was part of, aided and abetted and interfered with Congress in an insurrection? And that's a very strong question. Now, people are asking, what's the court going to do? First of all, let's talk about the court. The court is 6-3 with Roberts. And the sixth with Roberts have shown themselves to be political and ideologues. So in other words, we cannot rely on what we would think would be ordinary legal practices reflecting upon the Constitution. So anybody who predicts what's going to happen has to deal with that asterisk, a very big asterisk, that invokes our memory of what happened with Bush and Gore when the Supreme Court decided the presidential race. And so it's ironic that not too many years afterwards, here we are again. Now, normally, a court looks to the question as narrowly as possible on the facts and the law. So we have two states, Colorado and Maine, that say Trump is barred. So if you're going to look at those two cases together and narrowly, if your state's rights, you defer to them for that election. But if you believe, as I do, that the 14th Amendment is the supreme law of the land, both Article 14 and Section 3, then you can decide that as a matter of constitutional law, that what they did, barring him based on their fact-finding, was good and sufficient to exclude him. Now some say, are they going to issue an opinion that applies to all the states? And right now, there are 17 states pending with decisions to be made on whether or not to bar Trump from being on the ballot. And I think that the two cases should be instructional to the other cases and may have differences in state constitutional proceedings and the Constitution itself. So we have to consider those things. And under the theory of doing as little as possible, because we cannot foresee what will happen otherwise, we have this situation in which we have two clearly defined states, and those are the ones we should consider. And I believe both of them should be upheld. Seems rudimentary. Now, among the populist arguments against it is, you're interfering with our right to vote. You're disenfranchising us. No, we're not. Because there are qualifications for every office. And we have written out these qualifications in our Constitution. And if you're not of a certain age, you cannot run for president. If you are from a foreign, born in a foreign country, this was, they said, addressed to keep Hamilton from becoming president, then you can't run for president. And it's interesting that Trump is now caught in the kind of vice, that V-I-S-E, that he was so strongly against, at different times, Obama and our current vice president. That is to say that she maybe wasn't sufficiently resident and Obama wasn't sufficiently resident, and this went back and forth, and Trump thought this was just happiness and fun. Well, so the qualifications to be a candidate, and that you be an American citizen, is one of them. But it's also, did you take an oath and try to overthrow the government? And that requirement has not been met by Trump. Now, whether, let's take this as a Platonic argument that is ideal. If the words are understandable in Article 14, Section 3, and you do anything otherwise, you're acting in an unconstitutional fashion. Could I believe for a moment that this Supreme Court could do that? Well, if they could overthrow Roe v. Wade after 50 years, having told under oath the Senate that they would respect precedents, we know their word isn't worth anything. And, you know, the justices appreciate that the only way our system of justice works is if the people trust the court. And we can't. That's a problem. Now, could they win our trust? Yes. They could decide this or handle it in such a way that we would say, well, okay, that's more like it. But will they? Will they do that? And just as I had minor criticism for Special Counsel Smith's trust of the system in the Supreme Court to do the right thing by the fact that he asked the Supreme Court to rule on the questions pending so that the trial before Judge Chutkan could proceed, the Supreme Court looked for a way to delay, in my opinion, looked for a way to be on Trump's side. And obviously I'm not talking about three of the justices, but I am talking about the others. So that's what we're looking at. Now, we do this at a time in America when America is in a very different place than where we think it should be. Since our origin, that is, when we were writing the Declaration of Independence, we, from then forward, made blacks victims. Women were not even recognized as existing for many years. Indeed, we gave an identity to blacks and finally tried to erase slavery, but failed because of a civil war. But women didn't get the vote until 1920. And so we've had two large groups that have been victims, blacks and women. But they're not alone. We have victimized people of certain religions. We have victimized people who have no religion. And presently, we have the spectacle of both blacks being killed in public view for minor offenses that would normally just require an appearance ticket at some lower level court. Women are turned into victims and put in a kind of survival mode, if not for themselves, for their children, relations, friends, family, community. And this is another way of controlling the body politic. Continuously fighting about the borders rather than dealing with it. That is, let's spend the money, get the buildings, get the judges, get the personnel, and decide these cases of asylum or not. Don't eliminate asylum. Meet the obligation to get it done. So we have this environment in the United States where we're accumulating victims. And then we throw at them the responsibility for anything that's wrong with our society. Scapegoatism, McCarthyism, Hitlerism, Trumpism. The isms of discrimination and hate. The instruments of autocracy. And like past instances in history of governmental systems that were flawed this way, we have threats to the judges making decisions based on the Constitution and findings of fact. And Ms. Bellows, who's the Secretary of State in Maine, she's had death threats. Can you believe it? And she said that you don't expect, and you know it's wrong, that there should be threats to kill a judge and their family for doing their job. And this is particularly egregious when you consider how carefully she crossed her T's and dotted her I's. And the reaction is, we should throw her off the court. But this kind of fist and threat and discrimination is both mob-like and the kinds of tools that you see in an emerging dictatorship. So, could it be worse? Early on in the Trump administration, when he was playing around with what he would do to insulate himself from conflicts, he entirely ignored the emoluments clause, which simply put says, I don't take gifts from foreign nation states. But it turns out that at the very least, he has been taking $7.5 million, and this is found in a report released today on the Hill, and $5 million of it comes from China. And all of these 20 nation states that are involved in that sum of money, the 7.5 million, they all had business before our government. So in other words, the purpose of the emoluments clause, in the Constitution, by the way, to protect us from such conflicts, was entirely ignored. And so Trump and his family did what Trump's done his whole life, which is take. Trump business, that's what's important. And how much do you think he laughed when he said, I'm giving up to the country the salary that I might receive? Yes, well, I take millions more from these foreign nation states. So our country has a lot of work to do. And the daylight cast as a disinfectant on Trump, which normally works in a free society, is not having the effect that it has had in the past. And if we don't make it count, what can we expect? Now, some may say, well, we're doing fine. Well, we're not. The system is not working. And it's not working because the provisions in our Constitution that are the tools to protect and preserve our republic and our democracy are not being used. And so, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that the Constitution is being ignored in terms of emoluments, in terms of Article 14, Section 3, in terms of the impeachment. And a system can't work if you don't use any of the tools presented to you. So that's all I've got now, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.